Now it's in progress. It's now a cloudy recording. Yeah, I mean, this is something Dennis said also. I mean, at some point, I think we should consider just, I do use this account for other stuff. So it would be hard to share it as is. I think there's a chance that we might be better just to create a Zoom account for the group, perhaps. This way, everyone has access to the ID and the username, and then we record all the stuff to the cloud, and it's easy to access it again if it's lost, right? Or if it's a problem on YouTube. I don't know. I had a problem when I was converting it. My computer crashed, and then it corrupted the reconvert file, so it couldn't. Yeah, so just to go over again what I said before we started recording, just for the sake of keeping it on record, I shared here on the link on the chat. Share a link on the chat just for a document I put together with most of the text we wrote together and the subsections on those texts. Then text that I know we wrote either, alone or in smaller groups amongst us that are also directly relevant or connected to the main stuff, just so we can get a sense of what we've published. I imagine that if we do go forward with an idea of publishing a book or writing a collective book, that it wouldn't just be a matter of compiling what we have, even though we definitely have enough material. Probably would require expanding some stuff, rewriting some stuff, removing redundancies or things that are not relevant, adding stuff that is not there. So just getting a sense for the publications might help get a sense for what a good skeleton would look like. Then there was an idea that I think it's good to bring in the next meeting, because there are two ways to go about this. If we decide to try it out, the first way is this becomes a side project like we did with the World Systems Theory text. Whoever is interested in reworking the text, writing parts, and so on can engage. Or we can turn it into like a guiding kind of project for our meetings, in the sense that we start working for a while on discussing parts of this skeleton, reading old stuff, seeing what is wrong or what is unclear, and reworking on it, and so on and so forth. So it could also serve as kind of a thread for our future meetings. So even if we still do other stuff, right? So I don't know what's the preferred route. Not do it as a side thing, or do it as a main thing. But I guess that seeing that document might be helpful, just to get a feel for what we've done thus far. It's a lot of stuff. There are definitely also presentations that I thought of adding, like presentations that never were turned into text and probably remain like relevant things we go back to, and discuss. Like I think Renzo has a lot of presentations of that nature, so that we never turn them into specific text, that just describing them. But possibly if we were publishing something, it would be good to imagine that those things are included somehow. So I don't know. It's just, I feel like it might help. It's in the theme of a mapping that we said we would do today, but it's potentially something we can discuss next week, I guess. Actually, is the organizational meeting next week or 2 weeks from now? It's next week, right? Correct. Next Monday is already the 26th. Okay.
The year's going by.
Yeah. And then you mentioned, Rafael, just to keep on record, that Caio is doing the short proposal for research coordinator position, and you are doing the proposal for the decentral admin position for us to discuss next week, right? And people should comment before the meeting if possible.
Yeah, I actually already finished mine. I posted it on the, I don't know if I posted it on the org group or in the central admin, but I will post it in the main group, main English group.
Mostly
Maybe
on the
after.
community as well, like on the bullet.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I can post it on the community. That will be best, I think. Good idea. And I think that it's really important that we get going with the decentralized admin position. So I just like try to mix the stuff that people discussed. Try to get like a, it's really a very skeleton, I think, but I think the point is not like setting every task. I think it's more of a like, what is this task involved? How are you going to select it? Considering the discussions we've had. And so it would be very good. Like, I think this is very important. So I will stress it out on record that people read this proposal, that if they have like things that they don't agree with, if they have things that they think are better proposals, just come with them ready, I think, for the meeting. Or if you're not able to attend the meeting, let us know, like send a draft or a text or whatever, or just put an edit on the proposal. But let's have this like really worked out clearly and beforehand, so that we can get going with this, because I think that it's very easy to get into endless nitpicking. And while I agree that nitpicking might be fun, I also think that like this is something that we've been postponing for a while, and I think it would be nice to go through with it. So if there are any alternatives, there's no problem with that. I'm not married to any position, but it would be good that they be like presented also beforehand, so that we are not like on the spots deciding, oh, maybe this other idea. I mean, of course, some things will come about, but I think it would be nice, because contrary to the researcher position, which is a more experimental position that we don't know what we're figuring out exactly, I think this is a position that, in a sense, like it's like a very hands-on approach. I mean, it's a different kind of hands-on approach, but I think like it's something that's more well known, especially for us, because I mean, this is things that have been going on in the group, like indirectly or directly. So I think that's just I will post it on the community page, like Gabriel said. Like, I think I can do it right now. And then, okay, I'll do it after the meeting. I think it's better. But that's my my message, my update on the decentralized admin.
Sure. Kai's joining. So just to clarify, I mean, I proposed that John and Dennis were presenting their Frankenstein baby formal thingy today, and then they prudently postponed, so we wouldn't be shocked, so we have time to prepare. And then the meeting was open, and I just thought, like, perhaps on the in the same vein as that idea of doing like some group dynamic stuff where we just try to do stuff. Because I want is just a little guy, right? So in the vein of something like that, I thought a good use for the meeting, not to go to waste, was just for us to kind of try to give an overview. We did this a while back. I remember it ended up being quite a relevant meeting where we just went over these 5 pieces of S2P. Remember that we just had like a lot of discussion over like one basic diagram, really, and it ended up like really influencing a lot of stuff. So I thought that some version of that we could do, but I think that there is a method problem to discuss first, which is what is a good way to do that. because one way to go about it is just I share my screen and I can kind of like on Figma add stuff. But I thought, for example, one way that could be better is if I share the Figma file link with you guys. Let me see if you guys get to open it here. This way, for example, one person can be writing something and another one can add another note with another comment on a similar topic, or open something for us to look at after, you know? This file here is for the S2P diagram. It already has a bunch of stuff that we did at different moments in our work. It has John stuff, it has Dennis stuff, it has like drawings I did when we were working on the working through political organization stuff. There is Renzo's diagram for S2P structure. So I thought, I mean, we can just pick an empty spot in this. Share my screen. We could just pick an empty spot here on this already kind of full thing, right? And so I thought like, but to make it work, to make it possible, we probably would have just set some basic method of doing it, like, because there is a bunch of different stuff I think we might want to include somehow, right? To make this useful, not just as a kind of map that makes sense to people who are here, but also makes sense to people who might join later. Like, I'm just thinking of stuff that is, like, I think that evidently, like, there are concepts I think that we should add. The main diagrams that already are established, we could add. I know Dennis and I think John also mentioned this, like, just associate these things to the formal tools that are kind of backing up this, or that we are reading into. John in his presentation already did a bit of this. There was like a really nice diagram where he had the concepts and also arrows to, okay, this has to do with this field of mathematics or something like this. But I think that there are also other things like questions that return from time to time that are open and, you know, we've been working on. So yeah, I don't know, just trying to think here, like, what sort of thing would we want this map to include? Then we can just, let's say, agree on how these things are displayed or how they should be portrayed. Then it's easier to, you know, build something with that method. I'm not sure if you guys have any suggestions on that.
I wonder if it's possible, if we would be able to put like an order, because I think like the ordering between the different parts of this map, I think might be relevant when we think about like how to go from one diagram or from one formal tool, because we have like, for example, I mean, can you zoom out just a bit so I can look at the thanks. Because for example, we have like the org Trinitarianism, and they are inside, they have like different elements that are discussed and that are elaborated.
I don't even know where that is here. Like, there's Trinitarian, okay.
Yeah, because there's the composition and
yeah, I see.
So we have like studies into org Trinitarianism, but there's also like it's something that we have discussed, but I think we haven't hammered it yet, which is like, for example, the relation between org Trinitarianism and what's the name of our other diagram that's not the monster? Do you have a name for that?
We can also take the time to name stuff. Oh, that's useful.
Yeah, like, so we have the monster and we can have, I don't know, I mean, org Trinitarianism seems like just a big tool, like a bag of tools, but it's like our Felix the cat bag. But I think like it would be important also to see like, how do we go from one diagram, because they are in communication, but we have not always like explicitly gone from one to the other, like, you know.
Yeah, I think that in some cases we just don't know. right?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Separate
that's,
pieces.
yeah. But I mean this because like, I think like we know that they relate, but like the order, I mean, this is what I'm talking about order. I think this is something like order, not as a fixed sequence, but the problem of ordering, I think would be also something important to have. Yeah.
I also think that, I mean, I have the impression that like projects that we are developing, they probably could fit in this as well. Like they don't look like concepts or questions, but you know, the fact that we have different groups that are interested in what we're doing, different ways or projects we want to do. I mean, those things also highlight some things rather than others. Like, for example, one thing that I've been seeing is that there is more connections with groups that are contacting us on the basis of the Trinitarianism or the modes. Then, I mean, it's not like people are contacting us because they're really into the mathematics. So there's also the fact that once you see this map that has more of a conceptual structure, you can also see that some parts of it are more conductive to projects and ideas that are like moving outwards. Others are very internal. So I'm not sure if we should mix those things, like, but I could also see that, like, both from it becomes hard to add that dimension. Perhaps it's not that obvious, but I think like projects, our own structure, you know, those things could have a place in all of this, perhaps. I'm not sure if it's very clear on how to do it, but
I think this is important because there is an outward movement, I think, in the idea of doing this mapping. I mean, especially if it's going to assume it's going to be an exposition of our like working. So I think that's something that's really relevant. I wonder, however, like, because it's not exactly concepts, it's not exactly the tools. Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, I think it's like where, I mean, what did John say?
yeah, I like it. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, we discussed this, but we never, I think this wasn't fleshed out.
It's written in the text published on Crisis and Critique. John is right, but I mean, yeah, it definitely can go further. It's like a lot of our stuff, right?
Yeah, no.
I mean, I wonder even if perhaps the way to bring our structure into play isn't to use it as a filter, because, for example, there is stuff that we could add, but that interests like one person they never mentioned in any meeting, and let's say if they are working on it or not, kind of doesn't make a difference to the project for now, in the sense that it hasn't really been integrated. So we can also use we can come up with a kind of more organizational point of view to decide on the threshold. You know, is this a group issue or is it currently like a personal research issue that we haven't managed to break a threshold and include it into like a project part, you know? Because I'm sure like we can even divide it like that, like try to, you know, like it might, we put on this at the center stuff that is like constantly repeated, like even to use Amelia's idea, right? Stuff that has already regularity at the level of there is theoretical regularity. It appears in the meetings, right? With regularity. And then at the outer skirts, things that get mentioned or we know are interesting to specific people, but we haven't managed to make them part of the regular debate, you know? So you can start seeing where the threshold actually is. I mean, we can also add more stuff as we think. We don't need to have like a complete list before we begin, but just think it's useful to think about these things. Otherwise, it's might be hard to.
No, but I like this because especially I think there's an important issue of course, I'm speaking here for myself, but I think one of the biggest like issues for me in the group, and this is something that I think I'm trying to work, is that there are issues or there are questions, there are problems that might start out as personal, but you start to think like, how are they treatable in the framework? And I think like this is I think it's important, like, because not everything is going to be, we want to be treatable. Not everything is treated already, I think. But I think that like it's something that I mean, I think there's like, you put like, there are things that are discussed, there are things that are mentioned, and there are things that might be currently personal, but are not necessarily personal. And I think maybe if that's what you were I don't know if you were going that direction, but I think like it would be also good to include this also in a way, because sometimes just putting things out there, maybe other people might be interested in these issues and these could be like worked out. So I don't know if this would be useful, but for the outer core of the mapping.
Yeah, no, I think that that's definitely a good thing. Like, one thing I think this map could be useful for is that, okay, for people who are just arriving, they get a chance to see, okay, this ground has been covered. For people who are here and might want to engage more, it might make it easier to add arrows and say, okay, this is a thing I'd be interested in focusing on, or okay, therefore there is a connection between these things I didn't see before, right? Things like that might make it easier to cross the threshold, right?
Is that another link that you put, or?
No, it's just a link to Figma in case anyone else wants to be able to write. I mean, can you guys only look at it, or can you actually write on this page if you want by clicking on that link? I see Renzo there.
Is anyone attempting to write?
Yeah, it's just the silence is hard to read the minds of people.
We have not what delegated reasoning is not fully accomplished for these issues.
No, it's the opposite. It's just delegate less. Try it yourself.
Yeah. You know, that got me thinking. I think there are like some but this is, I think, like this is nothing to do, but I think that there are like, we could have like if we are, and now I'm thinking like, if we were like a TV show, there would be moments where we would do like let's like put an episode that was aired like last year. Let's get back to these questions as if they were new, because I was thinking of like, there are a lot of meetings that we've had that they were like one-off meetings. They were excellent, but for numerous reasons they never came back. So I was just thinking that like, while someone is experimenting, that this is something like this is maybe for the organizational meeting, but just something I thought. Best
I was going to suggest also that, I mean, if there are some kind of, you can add like sticky notes and things like this, right? To the page. We can just agree on like, yeah. So if you want to add a comment to some concept or something like this, you can use one of these sticky notes. And I thought of just adding the main concepts just straight up with a like large text like this. Then you can try to organize stuff around that, right?
You know, I can't like write on your box. I was trying to write, like to click and just so, because I don't think anyone.
Yeah, but
So-
I think like, okay, in that case, you can just tell me what you want. I can add it.
Oh no, it's possible.
Okay.
Okay, so. Okay.
So perhaps this is even a possible order here now that I'm thinking of it. Like, if we add the like concepts that we already have names for them, I remember like when Dennis did that survey, he managed to name a lot of stuff. We could see that it's not that hard to give it kind of recognizable names, right? We can like add little descriptions if that's easy, or at least, you know, something to identify what we're talking about. And if there are diagrams associated with those ideas, we can add them near it, things like that. So just trying to think here really quickly, like, so this is a Trinitarianism, right? This is something that what else is a, I mean, I think that we also need we created this name for a diagram, which would be also good to start naming these things. For example, we have this, I'm just add it here. We have this, it's already done here somewhere, right? So what's the name of this diagram that we use in the?
Is it social mediation?
Yeah, right now, I think that's the thing that would identify for me at least. But I'm not sure if anyone had, I mean.
Let's have a cool name like, or wait, I mean, it's a very good mixture. Like on the one hand, we have like a really banal name, social mediation, and then we have like a fancy organizational Trinitarianism, and then we have like the monster.
And this thing here gets inverted into this, even though the relation between these two things is in itself something we haven't really discussed very well, right? I think on the level, yeah, one question I have already at this level is the diagram of the monster. Is that, actually, these are 3 diagrams ultimately, right?
Yeah.
So we ended up writing the diagrams before anything else. So
yeah, you know, I wonder if like diagrams are our most like central aspect, and like when things are fully fleshed out, like, is that something that makes sense? At least for centering the presentation.
yeah, I'm not sure.
Aren't they also like ordered by like generality, like the Trinitarianism being the most general one? Then we have yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe the monster is some like basic description of the social world, and then the social mediation one is what gets you to distinguish between social and political. So they seem to also be more and more specific, but I'm not sure.
I would frame like it's possible to read the monster inside the social mediation diagram. So I mean, it's something that's.
Yeah, before we talk about the connections, let's just make sure like we
have the main points.
Yeah, I mean, just one question I have, just like we call the monster the description of this world with the 3 modes, but when you have also the fact that, you know, when we write it like this,
in a generic form
with the org here, yeah, like, do we call it by the same name? Is this the same thing?
This is the angel. No, I think monster is the evil version.
So what's the name of this one?
No, I think actually like we called the whole one monster in the atlas.
So this is a monster because it is a very complicated diagram, not because it is a specific horrendous creature. Then
Well, I mean, just going by from what we did in the atlas, I don't think we did a distinction. When we presented the monster diagram, I mean, we can rename it like, but I mean, the monster would be like the original one with K, which is just WC, which is now WC, right? But if we change it, it would need to be something like maybe intercourse. Intercourse Trinitarianism.
yeah, I'm just thinking. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. Like, I just think that if you tell me this, the monster diagram, I assume that you're talking about this because rarely we mean that this is being seen from the standpoint of some particular form of organization. I have the impression, at least.
Mhm.
So but it might just be like communication noise, you know. But I mean, do you guys feel like there is another diagram that is I mean, now that I look at it, is this, I don't know, this is other stuff. Is there other kind of diagrammatic stuff we use that seems on par with this tree?
I think I don't think we did anything for the real abstraction text, right? I mean, there are some things that might be diagrams in the future, but I don't think that there was anything on par with.
Yeah, I might say that I mean, it's not a diagram, though there is kind of a formal aspect to it that you could explore. But I think that the new visual, almost formal tool we've been using from time to time now is like a unpacking of each logic in terms of different spaces, right? We've discussed that a lot in the last couple of months, right? Like, paraconsistency is about closed sets and things like those relations, they seem, but I'm not sure if they appear at this level or if they're about mathematics. Like, how should we, you know, at what level they should appear?
Wouldn't they appear at the level? I mean, this is. Wouldn't they appear like related to the monster diagram, either the expanded one or the? Because if they are like treating the logics or presenting them, I wonder if it's like include.
I just don't know if we should call them. Guys, by the way, for people who are just arriving and this looks totally crazy, we can just, as soon as we put the things on the paper, we can talk about each of them to make them clearer, just so we agree on what the things are, right? Yeah, the thing that I mean is this thing here. Let me just see if it's open. I have it here somewhere in this very crazy thing I did. Yes. This thing. This table.
No, I think this is a good table. But I wonder if it's like part of the, like inside the monster. I think it's like really fleshed out, but if we are organizing things, but.
Yeah, but I mean, things here are part of things. Like the monster, as you said, is inside of this W here on the social mediation diagram, right?
So do we put like also the conjunctural domination emancipation?
Yeah, perhaps, right? Good idea. So this would be a diagram. This is like
yeah.
Logic and space table.
And there was also something else that I remembered when you were saying about the other, which is like, I think Dennis did it was when we were discussing the differences between life, life. Oh, this is a really good one, I think. It's not finished. I think we were still, there were some points, but it's the one which is, let me see if I can put the,
John had something to say.
I'm lost because I have only one screen. So yeah, I was talking about this one.
Yeah, just so I think, and particularly with topology, I think there's like two kind of levels of question there. One is, how do we compose three kinds of topology from each of the three pure transcendentals in the monster in K? So there's like a level of composition of topologies per se, like at these kind of abstract levels, a paraconsistent one, a classical one, and intuitionistic. And then I think when we're talking about the way the arrows in the social mediation diagram operate, constraints, representations, actions, that's where we begin to use the various topologies to actually act as models for those actions. So that comes back to some of the stuff I brought up in my last presentation, right? Like topology is used as models in game theory. It's used in lenses. It's used in domain theory, all particular types of mediation that are from our Trinitarianism triangle. So I think like topology gives us the tools to actually link together the modes and how we describe concretely each of the arrows in the social mediation diagram. Or not, sorry, correct, social mediation diagram.
But is this just a suggestion to say that this is a technical device that is not yet part of let's say the canonical concepts, and it's actually just part of the formal material we've been using? It's like a technical thing. It shouldn't be at this stage yet.
You mean the topology is, quote, just technical?
Yeah, I'm just asking, like, because the diagrams are like the monster one, the social mediation one, and the Trinitarian one. They are like things that are more or less canonical, like they're more or less established, right? In the sense that we would, for example, want people who join the group to learn about them. We can explain them to some degree what they mean, and we already have like a basis for them. Whereas the description that every mode has to do with one logic, it's not contained in any of those three, right? It's a separate thing. But is it already something that has that value of being like a canonical thing we would like people to know as soon as they get here? Or is it like more like an open question? We don't have a kind of diagrammatic way of approaching it, or a more steady take on it yet. So we should consider it like a technical thing we're doing with logic. And, you see my point? Like, I feel like there's a division there. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Unfortunately, lost a chunk of that because my internet connection is being generated. But yeah, okay. So I think like we are in the stage where we need to test in some way, like in actual models somehow, which is part of what hopefully Frankenstein's monster will help to do. But I think we can take, maybe if not canon, like the leading hypothesis is the topological, like the model to disprove, or the model that needs to be surpassed. But I also think it like there's a lot of natural ways for topology to link the two diagrams, like I was saying originally. And we need to hash those technical details out, but I think we should definitely be committed to that as a strong hypothesis.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I think that isn't that kind of the status of all these things anyway.
Sorry, can you say that again? It switched out.
No, just asking, like, if you think that demotes those connections into a okay, these are not yet established, or if that's the status of all these ideas, they're all kind of the least worst idea we have.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, at that level, I mean, just personally, I'm all in on that until, but I don't know where the group is on that. So, but I would say for me personally, my research at this point is canonical that I'm interpreting the most topologically, and it seems like a pretty fruitful research direction.
So, I mean, just to add like a short description for these things, right? This organizational Trinitarianism diagram, it's meant to be the see if you guys think this is good. The proposition that to approach any phenomena from the organizational point of view means to treat these three aspects as ultimately equivalent. How things are composed, how what they interact with, what is intelligible to them. I'm not sure if this is too simplified. I also think that there always has been a question here for me, which is, I mean, perhaps it doesn't matter at this level, but intelligible and, you know, makes a difference, like that it has meaningful information, or that it has information that makes a difference, and that it is intelligible. That's a use of the word intelligible that it's definitely not that common, right? Some people would say that you need more than that to make something intelligible. And you know, when we use examples like well, you can create kind of material composites that are sensitive to some things but not others. We usually use the word sensitive, right, in the sense that it gets to be perturbed by something. So I'm not sure, like, if sensibility is almost like a passive form of interaction, and we mean something more than that by intelligibility. We mean, you know, like it is meaningful, that the difference is not just that it's sensible, it's not just that it perturbs, but that it, in doing so, it also is something you get to know, you know, condition per knowledge. I think it's more what we mean, but yeah, Monica, you raise your hand.
Yeah, you've been already talking about this diagram in terms of difference, like composition as the what differences compose another difference, the intelligibility, like what difference makes a difference, and the interaction, you know. And I'm also thinking about it in terms of boundary, and there are three modes of boundaries, like these sorry, I mean these closed sets and open closed set, and the different modes of boundary. Oh, okay. Just I don't know.
Yeah, I think that that's a totally underexplored thing, and I'm not sure if Renzo by chance added that to the site here, because there's also the whole thing he was working on with boundaries and so on. That should definitely be added here. I think that the discussion on how interaction establishes boundaries. I'm just gonna add like a better version of this diagram. Just 1 second.
Yeah, you know, that we can think of how do the three modes of boundary look from the point of view of composition and intelligibility and interaction. I think it's always on each vertex is always all of them, all the three. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we ever done this, to be honest. So I think it's definitely an open question. I'm just going to add this because you mentioned the difference. I think it's actually a kind of usually like a crucial concept. The fact that we use difference as a kind of way to discuss the three things, right? I think Renzo didn't add the boundary thing here, so perhaps we could add it on this side to make it easier to add your comments to the thing. Not sure how, Renzo, how have you been calling this? Is Renzo here? I think Renzo left, right?
Renzo left. He said, "Be right back."
Okay. Just trying to think how he's been calling this. I'll leave it here for him to add in a bit.
Would it be useful to put the variations of the org Trinitarianism diagram, the ones like cyberneticians, system theory, and I forgot the third one, and the one on the psychoanalysis, political conjecture, like under.
Yeah, you can add it here. I wouldn't add as a diagram. I think that's the
No,
type of thing. I think it's right below the threshold.
Yeah.
Like we never really gave him. I think Amelia's meeting was the first meeting where we actually discussed if there is a difference between this thing and cybernetics approach, rather than just say that there is. But Monica, I'm just gonna wait for Renzo to come back so we can add his schema for how to think about those different boundaries, and then we can add an arrow and say that there is an open question here, like. It's actually connecting three things, right? Connecting this general theory of what it means to look at things in an organized way. The fact that we associate each logic in a world with different structures, and the fact that these things should have an effect on how boundaries are constructed for. What does it mean to look at a boundary from a compositional and intelligibility point of view, not just the interaction, right? We're gonna wait for him to come back so he can lead us there. I think he's much more advanced on this. Should we just add, just so we don't lose track here, should we add like also a simplified description of this other stuff? I think this also just as a subtitle, right? It's definitely unclear as it is that we're calling I individual, M a mediation, E the ecology, right? W the world. I think that this is a point of contention for John, who is attached to calling worlds K rather than W.
We ecology is in political ecology, or we're gonna.
Yeah. And then there is the difference, right, between we add a plus when the case is that by going through E, individual and world are expanding, and we add a minus when in the second case here, by going through the political movement, the world is retracting, right? And that's currently our theory of what it means to be a conservative. So just how do you call this subtitle now? I don't know how you call this in English. Legenda.
Yeah, subtitle. Right? Oh, keys.
Oh, legend.
Yeah, just so like to to clarify what these are, right?
Wait, were you talking about me as having an issue with K or other John?
No, you like K more than W, right?
Oh, I don't care. I was thinking in terms of linking this diagram and the monster, right? Because K is a particular social world. But my question, if you're referring to in chat, stands either way. Like, are we still thinking of W in this diagram or K in the monster as a topos following Badu's notion of
Yeah, I think so.
on that
Yeah,
idea?
so K, I think that's also another thing here. Sometimes you put K here when you mean a world where C is dominant, right?
Well, generically, like K is just the synthesis of the three modes, right? Which is not necessarily like how we define W. There are two different definitions, kind of
I thought
category.
W, we just changed the letter to make it easier because K was already taken by capital. And we're starting to get confusing, like.
Changed it in the diagram.
Yeah, I think for a while now in the text, we've been putting W instead of K just for the sake of, and then typescripting up, superscripting the specific dominant.
Isn't it
More
like X
that
then
as-
in the generic one?
What?
Is it? Did we ever do like a TypeScript where the W on the expanded and not the one that was not necessarily capitalistic monster, which was like X instead of C?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't think we have a specific way of notating it. Just it's either an X or nothing, just to say like it's not yet defined.
Yeah, I don't know, just nitpicking. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm curious as well. I'm not sure what if we want to agree on something.
Yeah, I was just saying because like we haven't discussed this because we generally use the monster. We started using it for the K-centered, the C-centered one, the one centered on the logic on C, which is like our Cartesian heritage. And of course, like things are going in a further direction. But I mean, if we keep it if we have like a general form of the monster, which is not necessarily one specific formation, social formation, I think it cannot be C. It would be like, it would confuse a bit. Like it might be a detail, but just to.
Sorry, I'm just adding something here.
Yeah, no problem.
But please, guys, just go ahead and if you
Are
want
you
to settle on something.
That I'm not quite clear on what you think is confusing, not having a more generic one, or if we.
No, I think we have to have a generic one. What I was saying is that like, since we use A, B, and C as specific modes of intercourse and not like random notation, I think it would be confusing if the generic form had the C in the, superscript, because it would seem like if necessarily it's a C on the generic form.
Yeah,
And since, like we have social worlds that might be subordinated to B or A, it might be just like putting an X or a Y or whatever, just so we make a difference in that aspect, in the center one. I don't know if it makes sense or if it's just like.
no, I think
Just-
that makes a lot of sense because we could almost. I think one way we could potentially make this work is if we follow Badu and like the social mediation diagram we're looking at right now will be kind of like projected by geometric morphisms between toposes, so that the arrows between toposes will send the kind of information on how each mode maps these arrows of social mediation into a general social world.
Yes.
And so it'd be like each transcendental provides a different encoding of the social. It is the mathematics of like suturing that together, composing it together, synthesizing it, whatever, under the central W, I guess now. And somehow we have to account in that synthesis how one can be dominant over the other two, which just on a question of notation, originally when we started doing this, it was W dominant C, and then we had the other two as subscripts. We
Yeah, I think it's redundant, at least like if the person is familiarized to have the subscript, like what matters is the superscript. Like,
keeping that up.
yeah, but I do wonder like if we at least like, because I don't know if I understood the whole, John, I don't know if I understood like what every word meant in what you were saying. I will pretend I understood, but I do think that like it seemed to capture at least the relation I was thinking between the social mediation diagram and the monster, and which is the reason why I think that since W is necessarily a mixed structure, it's not the separate ones. I think it would be good not to have like, unless we are specifying for a specific social formation, like, oh, we are talking about like modern capitalism, or we are talking about Mongolian empire. Unless we are talking about one specific social formation, I think the superscript, at least for presentation, just so we don't confuse and think that there is only a world which is dominated by C, we should just put another like a free notation on the superscript for the general presentation.
Yeah, I'm totally lost in the conversation. Did you guys decide something?
Oh, this is just like notation nitpicking.
Yeah, but this is good. Like if it would be good to agree on how to go about it.
And also, if we don't do the nitpicking, we don't get our work taken as seriously.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that
Okay.
these
So-
things make a difference.
Yeah, because okay, so I'll just like because I think
okay, sorry. Yeah, go.
no, it's like very simple. We have currently like, can you focus on the monster just so I can say,
Yeah, that's
because
what I was trying.
yeah, okay, thanks. Sorry. I think there's a delay maybe. So I think like if you are describing social, like I was going to say socialist social formations. If we are describing modern capitalist social formations, I think it's correct and like precise to have the C, if we are keeping C as a notation for the mode of intercourse C, as the superscript. But if we pretend to think that our monster diagram is not necessarily one where the mode C subordinates modes A and B, I think when we are presenting a generic version, a general version, or we should have like a different superscript, which is a free variable. It should be like X or whatever, because so we don't confuse and like not act, but like so we don't confuse people thinking that there's only a world where capital commodity exchange dominates. I mean, does that make sense or?
Yeah. Okay, so could you guys just write down this thing for me then?
Okay.
I mean, but I just feel like since there are other people here who are not like in tune with that specific thing, it's good to take the time to also explain what these things are, right? I just try to, I can go back to the social mediation ones because now we're discussing the monster, but just think we should be able to give, I think we are like just able to give like short descriptions of what these things are compressing in terms of I guess that also might help clarify what we mean by the different notations you were discussing, right? Like C is meant to be the pure logic. If it's subscript, it's meant to be a non-dominating thing in that world. If it's an upper script, it's meant to be a dominating thing. And we were going to write W when the world is underdetermined, you know, something like that. I think that's what you guys were. Do you guys think while you're working on that, do you guys think that the description here for the social mediation one makes sense?
I think that the use of commutativity there is
It's too much, you mean? Or
no. I mean, no. Nice. Like it's good.
yeah, I
Really,
think
it's of like a lot of work in that. So that's
yeah, I added a little star because I know it's a technical term and probably a very important arrow to push aside, to pull aside to clarify, right, what we mean by it.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to when you were saying like the three, the composition, intelligibility, interaction, like they are equivalent. I think one thing we want to clarify, everyone's on the same page, is when we say equivalent, that's shorthand for a mathy term, equivalent under isomorphism, which is a certain kind of transformation, right? So we're not saying they're identical. We're not saying they're the same. And I think we haven't really defined what that isomorphism looks like yet. So we're kind of still trying to find the language for that. And I think there's something similar with the use of commutative here. I don't know how we'd prove that per se, but I think that's a direction to try to further formalize it.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure if these arrows here mean the same thing as these arrows in terms of like it's categorical. I think that this means something different in my opinion. I'm okay with this being more philosophical, less clear, because what does it mean to say that there are different aspects of the same thing? Like I see that it might be some connection with what equivalence means in category theory, but in this particular case, I think it's easier to do it because when you look at this thing here, just to talk about it very quickly for people who don't know it, right? The idea is that we want to define the difference between social and political, and between emancipatory, conservative, and reactionary, based purely on relations, right? And these relations are actually of all of the same type, in the sense that they're inclusions, right? The mediations are part of the world, and individuals are part of the world. So it stands to reason that most of the time, if an individual is part of a school and the school is part of the world, the individual is part of the world. So to show that there is some commutativity between this type of inclusivities here, right? If you're part of something that is part of something bigger, you're part of that something bigger, yes, right? This is how we're basically defining sociality as a kind of conservative sociality. If this is the case, the way you belong to a part of the world, and that part of the world belongs to the world as such, is pretty much the same as the way you belong to the world. You count in the same way in both directions. We call that a social institution, mediation, social organization, whatever. Whereas if the upper path through a mediation leads you to be included in the world in a different way than you're directly included in it. So you exist as a teenager who is, being taken care by your parents, you're not an adult, but then you're engaged with, students protesting and occupying their schools, and suddenly you're seen by the police as a menace. Those two inclusions in the world don't match. So that mismatch is how we see an opening for something to be political. And the explanation of why it is political, it's because that mediation is also taking on determinations from a movement rather than from itself, right? It's composing something which is not just composing the world. And then that's why you get this bigger triangle, which is the moment that a mediation is also trying to compose a movement, it is also pushing the individual away from its kind of social place and pushing the world towards a bigger world. that needs to include this thing that is not totally part of it, and so on. So right, that would be, let's say, the basic logic of it. So I think for this case, it's kind of naive to translate it in terms of inclusion because it's a bit more complex than just that stuff, right? Yes, exactly. There's a cardinality issue. I mean, if you look at this thing here, it is the simplest, okay, it doesn't look simple, but it is the simplest way to explain what the generic is. Because if M is submitted to E, that means that M is impredicative from the standpoint of the world, and you need a bigger extended model to fit that mediation, right? So it's a generic subset in a way. So it's a nice representation of very technical point. The good thing is that you can think of this in the inverse, and it also works. So if this mismatch is pushing towards the world being bigger because you're organizing in new ways with new commitments, this is pushing you to be a different person, and it's pushing the world to also change and add more stuff. You can just get the inverse, where you're not simply, let's say, engaged in institutions that are included in the world just as you are. You can also engage in institutions that are part of a movement that diminishes what individuals can be and diminishes what the world can be. So it's trying to reduce it to a smaller version of itself. So if you just invert all the arrows, this is our hypothesis. We haven't really explained this very well, right? It's just kind of an idea right now, because if you look at this, all the arrows are the inverse. In this model here, individuals act on mediations, mediations act on the world, and individuals act in the world, right? If you look at here, it's the inverse, like individuals are constraining mediation. They're asking mediations to allow less. Mediations are constraining the world, right? And the world acts on individuals. The world is the other who acts, right? I don't act on the world, I constrain the world. It's the inverse. So one hypothesis we have is that if you invert all the arrows in this diagram, you explain reactionary. So there is a dualism kind of between reactionary and emancipation. And conservative politics is kind of the common core to both. It's a place through which you seep between the two things, right? So I mean, it's not strictly set theory based. As you said, there is inclusion, there is size, so, and there is logic also at play, but it's easier to explain commutativity in these things than it is to explain it in that other diagram, I think. Not sure what you think, John.
I think that all makes a lot of sense.
I'm gonna add something here, which I also think it's a relevant thing.
Victor has a really good point. I think it would be worth
yeah, exactly. I was gonna add something on that.
Over a little bit more. And yeah, I know it's important to link it to some of our quote critical works in terms of like
yeah, I was gonna add exactly like the recent stuff we did on aligned and misaligned, because we use this to explain center and peripheries. Then we can also add his misaligned social atoms, right? Which is the basis for discussing peripheries. And because I think his point is something we never discussed, but it totally follows from this, right? If I understood your point, Vitor, let's say you have a classical world, probably what fits very neatly in the middle of this thing here, since all layers are kind of aligned and they harmonize, to belong to one layer, to belong to an institution, to belong to that institution in all three layers, right? So if you belong to the nuclear family, that already means you're kind of a citizen. That already means you're part of the labor force, the formal labor force, right? So there is a kind of progressive a modern conservatism. But in a misaligned world, for example, it might be you're part of the world as a worker, a part of the world as a member of a family or a group or a clan or a community, but you're not part of the world in terms of the state. So that even though the same institutions are in place, now they might become reactionary because they are willing to exclude you at the level of state because you're an illegal migrant, for example, right? So the chances that there is less space for conservatism in a peripheral world, we could make that case, right? It sounds like almost like a theorem, a kind of at least a statistical theorem, if you combine the mediation diagram with the theory of aligned and misaligned atoms, that peripheral worlds have less space for conservatism, because to be a conservative in one level doesn't guarantee you're a conservative on another level, right? Not sure if that made sense in my head. I'm not sure if it makes actual sense.
Yeah, I was thinking like in the movement of the emergency income of the mothers of the emergency income, it's like being part of a family produced something politically that, like, in a country where being a mother is something that the state sanctions, so they already give like income, and that is a given. It's like the fact that the state makes the woman be a mother, but doesn't give conditions. So it produces a political movement that wouldn't otherwise exist. I was thinking like in these terms, or maybe like if you live in a community that is like that you don't have rights, normal rights, it can either like produce reactionary consequences or stuff that should be conservative, like, I don't know, the right to due process becomes a revolutionary demand. And I was thinking like, maybe combining the two. I still can't say like in the deep using the letters and the stuff, but I think maybe we could try doing that kind of combined analysis that could maybe produce something that like helpful to understand new things.
I'm just trying to add this thing. Like, it seems like the monster diagram is kind of in the middle, right? Like, if you take the modes, it takes you here. Or let me add some other color. If you go from the point of view of the modes, it will take you to this. If you ask, what is a social world particularly? Like, what made it social? It takes you to this study. If you ask, what is the difference between kind of geographically or in terms of centers and peripheries, how you describe these things, it takes you here. If you ask about how org relates to the world, it takes you to this diagram, right? Perhaps to address Monica's question, I should write this differently. Like, I'll just put this thing here at a bottom, because I do agree that this is like this is something that this is something we're very close to deal with, but we haven't, which is how do the logical modes relate to the boundary stuff? Right, so again, this comes to here. And I think that there is a common line that goes this way from here and from here, right? That we could probably add like little questions here that make this make more sense also. Also wonder, Hansel, if you wouldn't prefer to separate these two things. I know, okay, now I can see that they're clearly very connected. Just because, yeah, no, but they're precisely the mix of these two topics, right? There is struggle is kind of inherently in the formulation, right?
But what were you thinking about separating?
No, I was just thinking like if you would like to separate like the aspect of the description of boundaries in general, as let's say, how I think was a bit of Monica's question was, in which sense are each mode determining different ways in which the boundaries are created, because the modes affect that. That's like say a conservative question, right? Then there's the question of how struggle appears once those modes are actually at the frontier between a political movement and the world.
Yeah, I think the logic.
And now that I think of it,
modes-
there's also an arrow from here to here.
Yeah, definitely. I think in my like at least to me the question of boundaries appeared as a question more of when the question of how like political bodies interacted with social worlds, so that the question becomes visible. But there is, I think, in the logical table for modes, boundary becomes this more general concept, right? Which is not necessarily tied to the way it appears in
Yeah.
conflict.
Also, if we were to fully do what Monica asked, it's also a question that concerns how this big thing here gets reflected here, the interaction composition, like how, because boundaries are being thought here mostly in terms of interaction. So how do the other two aspects feature? But I don't think we've explored that much yet, right? Yeah, I also guess now looking at it that there is an arrow going from Trinitarianism to this, because we did propose, as John remembered, that action, constraint, and reduction are kind of the issue of how are you composed, means how are these constraints connected? Interaction is what actions you can do, and how is the world reduced to you? How is it transcendentally appearing to you? That's the issue of intelligibility, right? So there is a connection here as well. Perhaps the domination emancipation thing is something that is we haven't really connected it very much. I'm just going to add it here because it kind of, I mean, it does follow from this distinction between emancipation, conservative, and reactionary, right? There should be a connection somewhere.
I had added this old slide that we discussed once, so I'm just because I don't know if it might not help, but
Wow.
like
These two
this
things.
the yellow sticky note.
This one on top here.
Yeah, it was like we once discussed it in terms of, I was just, it was an effort to try to tie like principles that we sort of like adhered, like that were on one hand very general, like I mean they are, I think they translate like multiplicity is basically one of the theses of like the social world being complex, composition being more or less the organizational point of view, and transitivity is in some senses this preoccupation with mediation. But in this diagram I was trying to sort of like contrast with existing politics and the way that existing politics thinks. And I think that's at some point would be relevant, like helpful, like because it reminds me a bit of the domination emancipation diagram, in the sense that we sometimes situate ourselves among like what are the other approaches. And I think like multiplicity, composition, they can be opposed to like other ways to frame and politically think. So at some point, like I think it could help like systematizing the like we did with domination and emancipation, but sort of like focusing on our like interesting transitivity of like the local the scale, sensitivity, the compositional like aspect, and the multiplicity. I think these are like some of the ways I think that helps to situate ourselves in other political approaches.
Yeah, I think one thing you could do, like since you use the yellow sticker for that, perhaps we could add in yellow stickers things that already have been discussed somewhere, but as we said, like it's not kind of past the threshold where it's, you know, it would be just a diagram we already know. And John, how about, I mean, I just saw your message here, like it would be perhaps also a good thing to add with a different color sticker notes, like formal stuff that is associated with these ideas, you know. I thought of doing that afterwards, but we can do it kind of together at the same time.
Yeah, sure, I can.
Rafael gave a really good description here of what this diagram is like, how to read it, what it is doing generally. I'm just gonna add as a for the bottom version of it. What does it mean to add org here, right? I think this also clarifies that there is a connection between this diagram org and the composition interaction, blah, blah, blah one, right? I mean, how you move from the monster to the expanded version is just by asking the question, okay, but how did we historically get to see the monster, right? Like we have the means to answer that question by saying, actually, just do like this and then move this on top. Well, we do get to see the world as being composed of forms with this structure because we know how to struggle against the world on those terms, right? So the history of political struggles that resist the world at the level of affinity, contract, and value, and therefore by resisting, interact, and therefore make it intelligible, precedes the formal capacity to say the world is made of those things, right? So there is actually an arrow coming from this upper thing to that thing as well. I just want to make sure. Sorry, did I use a, yeah, okay, it's a different color. Okay. I love the little yellow arrow. So just to see if there are other things, just to write down what they mean, right? So the logical table thing, we're just saying that a hypothesis that we are working on with is that each of the pure logics that form a social space, social world, can be thought in terms of three different types of logical structure. Paraconsistent logic, mode A, classical logic, B, and intuitive logic, mode C. The technical part of this, we can leave it to a separate note, right? Where what does it mean to think logics in these terms from a categorical point of view, how this connects to the space forms here. I think that that's a gray sticky note rather than a blue one, probably. But I'm not sure if this is also clear. I do think that there's something to add here, but perhaps it also connects with the other thing on top here, which is the fact that if this hypothesis is true, we can derive the properties of well-known social institutions. So value, gift, contracts, etc., from a purely relational and structural practice, rather than assume them as a given, right? So if this is correct, we could, in principle, substitute the words value, gift, and contract for a kind of a logical description of interactions, and people should be able to identify, yes, if this is what happened, this was an exchange based on value, right? So I think that is something that has been scaring me, because I never stopped to think about what we were doing, and I think we're kind of doing that, and that's weird. So it's probably worth saying. And this probably leads us to explain this part here, which is something Dennis worked a lot in the last text, which is to say, we have a theory, we have the formal means to construct a general concept of world, but we need to explain what are the precise conditions under which we can call something a social world. So what makes something social? Right now, the hypothesis, the current hypothesis, I think it's underdetermined, but under studied, but it's something that's already in print. We discussed it in a couple of meetings the last months, is that the current hypothesis is that sociality is distinguished from organic and ecological kind of systems, in that the parts, even though its parts are individuated living things, the practices they are assigned by the whole does not directly guarantee their survival, aka division of labor, right? So to have a social world, you not only need to have life, but you also need to have life that's interdependent, but you also need that interdependence to be of a type that the practices that each dependent part is doing is not directly guaranteeing they survive. So if everyone could eat the product of their labor, I'm a shoemaker, I live off of shoes. So even though society is telling me to make shoes for some reason, I can eat the shoe straight up and everything I need is there. It's full of protein. That's not exactly a social behavior. There's more like an ecology or a natural environment. But the moment that the thing you do doesn't complete your own reproduction, but requires you to go through the actions of others to guarantee your own reproduction, and this is the general form of actions, right? Then you have social reproduction proper. So I think it's a definition that Dennis proposed that that like centers the definition of social world on social reproduction, right? The reproduction of life goes through the other, and not in a way that both are mutually concerned with themselves, and this is facilitated by their connection. On the contrary, you're totally dependent on others because you're creating a shoe, selling the shoe, getting the money, going to buy something, and the atoms are distributed from a top down, right? It's what we call downward synthesis for describing the atoms. They're not already guaranteeing your survival from the bottom up, right? Does it make sense, guys? No.
I mean, it makes sense from having been, yeah, I don't know how much makes sense now for clarification.
Yeah, I'm asking because it's also good to have questions, because this opens up, it facilitates us adding questions and what people want to continue researching if they have connections to this issue. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure we don't go into the detailed discussions of anything before we have like just some minimal description of what that thing is meant to be doing, right?
Yeah, I think that the description you just provided is a good summary of our points on that. Say it makes sense.
And here, just given that social worlds have multiple logics to them, we consider the general case where these logics map onto different parts of the substrate, this align layers, and the special case where they map onto the same part through the same type, ultimately, same composite type, which is the aligned case, right? We connect this to the difference between center and peripheral areas of a social web. I think that this is a totally underappreciated thing we can still do a lot with also, because it's a really nice place. Like when you see these two things here, right? The idea that how you're seeing from the standpoint of mode A, how you're seeing from the standpoint of mode B and mode C, you can kind of name the three positions you have with one single description, right? Whereas in the misaligned, you actually need to navigate this, the fact that you're positioned differently at different layers. There is a kind of consequence for political language almost, right? Or social descriptors. The fact that if you can integrate so neatly, that means that there are like composite types, like specific ways of addressing that already capture that full thing, right? So I don't know, a free individual, like I'm free. When you say that and you're in Paris 1975 and you live in Paris, you probably mean that you're part of a certain family structure, you're part of a certain way of being seen by the state, and you're being seen by capital in a certain way, right? Like, it's a way of integrating all those things. When you say like, I'm human or whatever, right? It's a type that connects your position in all those things at once. You don't need to describe them separately, right? Compared with having to navigate being positioned in these things in a different way for each layer, for example. When the synthesis is heterogeneous, so you need like a language that has the descriptions separate from one another. So there's something interesting there that we could also go more into, and I don't think we have really discussed much yet. And any of these things don't have any way of explaining what they are yet. Good. Yeah, I was gonna say we should add the thesis as we agreed. Yeah, I think only the boundary thing, Renzo, if you're up for just describing it with one of these blue things afterwards. This thing here is kind of left, like the emancipation domination thing, right? It's not so developed. It should have some connection with this, but we haven't really explored that very much. Renzo, would you mind if I just make it a bit bigger?
Yeah,
so it's easier to read on the whole thing and to connect with other.
I also don't know if you agree with the division 2 by 2.
Yeah, I remember we discussed this, like Vitor cut his hair. I remember you proposed this, like when we were reading the text together. I think it's good that there is like a, yeah, I can see it divided like that. I'm not sure what you guys think, and if the pieces are clear for everyone as well.
I think the main one that I'm still kind of vague on is number 3, the precedence of popular, vulgar, left, right, especially kind of in the context of our formal distinction between left and right with the social mediation diagram. That almost seems to make that seem logically prior because we've got it built into our kind of diagram. So I think that I would just like some more clarity.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think it's the first time we actually connected two things more directly, right? That my understanding of that third thesis is that if you build your mediations to a situation where there is no vulgarization, so if you build your mediations exactly as Vitor was describing, like for a central formation or a centralizing one where modernization is happening, right? That idea that you can even add this on top there afterwards, that we define peripherization as when misaligned atoms are increasing, and we define modernization when aligned atoms are increasing. So let's say you build your mediations for a moment of modernization, right? There's going to be an increased situation where the way you're mediated in one layer means you're also mediated homogeneously in the others, right? Versus peripherization situation where the way you're mediated by your family doesn't mean you're economically mediated in a harmonious way. So you can be, you know, neo-Pentecostalist in your community, but you're a drug dealer economically, and you're an illegal criminal from the standpoint of the state, even though you have status in the community. So it can be like a mess, right? The idea is that terrain precedes, like it can saturate the distinction between right and left. So for example, you might think you're being, yeah, I mean, we could even rephrase it using the connection with that diagram. Like it could be said something like, if you try to be a progressive in a peripheral world, you might be a conservative because you're just trying to keep the homogeneous mediations alive. Like, but guys, modernity was so good. Let's keep what we want. But then you're actually trying to keep the world less complex. So it might look like a conservative. No, you think you're a progressive, but in practice you're a conservative, right? And you were a conservative until yesterday, but now you're asking to just kill criminals because good criminals are dead criminals, like we've been having here in Brazil, the slogan. You look like we're a conservative, but now you're a reactionary. So where you stand in the right-left inclination is kind of determined. You know, if you don't shift the forms and the terrain shifts below you, the forms can get saturated in the sense that they no longer latch onto the things they used to latch. So the tension between popular and vulgar, if you understand it as homogeneous versus heterogeneous social terrain, precedes the tension between left and right. Because what works as leftist in a modern situation might become conservative or even reactionary, and what worked as conservative might become more reactionary just because the terrain shifted, but the institutions didn't. Not sure if that made.
The parts that I got made sense. Unfortunately, like 50% of that was lost in the internet, of course. But no, I mean, I think that did help clarify. It seems like there's essentially one question then would be like an open question is, what does the process of homogenization look like from within the diagram of the social mediation diagram? Like when we're talking about expanding versus contracting worlds, how that kind of interacts with the process of homogenization.
Okay, this doesn't happen.
But yeah, open question.
Yeah, I was thinking of just making it huge so we could add links to other stuff, but I don't think it would work. Yeah, I think that this is a good question that this model helps because yeah, it's a good example. Vitor, this issue does connect with what you asked before, right?
Yes. Yeah, the vulgarization. Yeah, I think that.
I also wonder, I mean, it's what you guys think about the status of this, because they are conjunctural in the sense that there are a diagnosis, right? They are propositions, but they're also a bit weird because they're like the status of them is weird. They're generally describing something general, right? Not really describing something particular. I'm not sure, like it's a weird type of conjuncture analysis in that way. Like I have the impression that the form of most of these statements is something like, this thing you thought was general is actually particular. So you need to organize thinking about something more general rather than this is the specific thing that is happening now and that you should focus on, right? Which would make sense because the conjunctural, yeah, exactly. Because the conjunctural, we did make a crappy argument against conjuncture here on top. So what does conjuncture mean from this structural point of view, right? I'm even gonna try to make it easier to combine these things. You can just put it here. Sorry. Yeah, would you mind just bringing this? We can bring like, yeah, bring all of this just to the bottom here so we can connect it to the thing too. It would be totally crazy if we managed to actually add like little comments to these red arrows, like, because there are like types of questions that lead from one thing to the other as well. But I'm just gonna add this comment because I think it's it is a relevant feature of this thesis, right? The fact that yeah, I think this should be actually gray, like right, this is not like an explanation, this is just like a comment, I guess.
Yeah, the align misalign slide is definitely related to the conjunctural thesis, but it's on
Yeah.
top, so it's hard to reach. But if you look like it's forming like a almost linearly ordered thing, because you can see the most general and it's all like flowing to the more concrete stuff, but there's a sort of like hierarchy. So align and misalign would be sort of like more in the mid-level.
So we could remove this from here and change its position, right?
Yeah, maybe it's too much work, but it would fall like
Like
if you
this.
were to, like, all arrows should go down, all the red arrows should go down. It's possible, and it's
Okay, let's do that. I guess then the conjunctural thesis, we should bring them lower so that it's easier to connect, right?
yeah.
I mean, this is kind of cool that this works, man.
It almost looks like the skeleton of something.
Can just add that statement on top of it. To keep in line with our I think that looking at it like this, it's a weird thing because you get the Trinitarianism on top, but you see like the monster and the Trinitarianism, the actual relation, right? And now that I think of it, shouldn't we, if we want to order this properly, let me just do something here to what John did. I mean, we can still keep it on top just for the sake of it, but the arrow that this actually describes is this way, right? Like interaction guarantees org. Like this diagram guarantees that if you struggle, things become more intelligible. So that guarantees the org exists. Because org exists, that gives you the monster as a political historical consequence of this, right? I think it's better to move the expanded version up rather than the monster down, since there are many arrows coming from the monster, perhaps.
Oh, I see. Okay, so
I'm not sure. Like I'm fine with this arrow going inverted just because it sounds like so much trouble to just get it right, but yeah, let's just do it. Well, we can do it. Okay. How? Take this, move it up here.
yeah, I think the monster can go slightly down without like messing too much.
Yeah, we
like-
can do the red arrows again, no problem. That actually is an argument for having a separate name, right? For the monster and the org thing. Because there is a bit of contingency between the two. Like it could have been the case that something totally different emerged out of, you know, the epistemological recollection out of political struggle. Like people could have seen something other than this thing, right? So perhaps there could, like, this thing here should have like a different, because it has a precedence kind of over the monster, right?
Yeah, but nothing, the monster doesn't connect to anything, right? Like everything was
mean?
connected to the bigger one with org. Like, couldn't it be almost cut out? Or is it good?
No, I don't know. I think that it's relevant that we usually like we don't use the two for the same thing. We use the monster most, then we use
Yeah.
the
It's true.
but now it's, I mean, guys, sorry, this is like nerdy peeking, but yeah, probably we should just make it so that you can also have an arrow going down towards the stuff you added on boundary, right? This goes here. I guess that this arrow no longer is necessary. It's actually true org that you get to that. Yeah, much clearer now. Now it looks like a very deformed skeleton of some.
In terms of nomenclature, would now be W, right? Or W superscript C instead of K.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can add the proviso that K is WC, right? It's a specific.
Maybe could you add that to the legend, or can I add that to the legend? Or separate note?
Uh, why is it not a? Yes.
Guys,
Sure.
so this aligned and misaligned social items, there are 3 layers,
Mm-hmm.
which are the logical layers of T8, TB, and TC.
Yes.
Yes. So what if we note it like that? Like,
yeah, I mean,
and so
you
the,
already added here, right? You mean A, B, and C here to make it clearer, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just add that.
And so the synthesis is the WE.
Yeah, but it's,
W.
yes, but think of it as a local thing, right? Rather
Yeah,
than W is the whole thing.
for a single item, a
Yeah.
situation of a social item.
Yes, exactly.
In the world.
Exactly. We perhaps, I mean, we never use this, but I imagine if it
So
wouldn't
perhaps
be
it's also, sorry,
please go.
perhaps it's also, please speak.
No, I was just gonna say, like, perhaps we never use this, but we could use like small W just to name when we're talking about a bit of the world that already has the 3 layers inside of it, you know?
Mhm.
Like, and big W for when we're talking about the whole world. I don't know, but we
Yeah.
never really settled on something for how do you call when the things are already integrated. But yes, as you said, these are the same layers as they are here, which are the same layers as they are A, B, and C here, right?
Yeah, and the atom, is it the individual from the social mediation diagram, for example, also?
Yeah, I think it can both be the individual or the M.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
Yeah. Ultimately, I mean, we did try to do a nice little exercise in one of the papers, which is to show that ultimately they're only mediations because the individual is the smallest mediation, but it's still a part. And the world is kind of like the biggest mediation of itself. So ultimately, they're only parts of the world. So if this point here, you treat it as an individual, or if the point here is an institution, or if the point is an organization or a country, you know, like it depends on what is the level, the scale that is relevant to analyze. But we will call it an atom specifically when it's the smallest relevant scale. But for example, if you're discussing geopolitical interaction between countries, it's unlikely that individuals are the relevant scale. The minimal relevant scale might be a part of a territory or something like this, right? So it's not necessary that you always can return back to individual people.
Yeah,
so
course.
generally you can, yeah.
Probably, yeah. When we talk relations between nations, perhaps newspaper articles could be such atoms.
Yeah, I think it's or official meetings. Suddenly it's no longer. For example, if it's not seen by the state as a meeting, probably it doesn't have geopolitical relevance. Like if, I don't know, Putin is at a bar with somebody, you know, it's not really gonna do anything. But if he does it in public, suddenly it's relevant, you know. Things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but it was good to see, Monica, that like just the way you were talking about it, you could clearly see like, okay, this arrow here now makes more sense, right? These T's here, they are meant to be have these properties, and therefore they can be glued together in this way, right? I also think that this is also a very underexplored thing. I think John is the only one who did touch on it more, which is this orange things. We haven't really done much to talk about why it is that it's always easier to bind together 2 rather than 3 modes. So, for example, it's easier to give a description or to compose together and sum together 2 modes and leave a third out than to compose the 3 together. I think there's a lot of stuff to study there that we haven't really looked into. But yeah, so just to not give up on that question, I think that we might want to at some point see if we want to call this monster diagram, or I have the impression that generally when we talk about org, this is the schema that we're talking about, right? Which is just it's often also connected to the fact that in our schema, in our approach, politics comes before political science. So there is no capital without the workers' movement. There is no anthropology without movements against segregation, colonization, interchange between peoples before. So if you don't interact, you wouldn't even know the thing exists, socially speaking, right? So these arrows here that concern how organizations interact with mode C, how they interact with mode A, how they interact with mode B, precedes our knowledge of mode C, mode A, mode B. There wouldn't be a knowledge of those things if we couldn't interact with them, right? So that's why this org thing precedes the monster in a certain way. I wish we had a really nice drawing we made. I think Dennis made some time ago of these 2 things, because it does look like this is kind of an octopus and like a big wormy creature, like a mouth here. So it was a nice kind of interaction between the 2. I think that there's also something we're not adding. It's a pity Dennis is not here. Dennis would probably already have mentioned it, which is from this theory here, but I guess it goes into the technical realm. It's not something we've been using so religiously, like it's not that clear yet. It's quite technical, but it's the theory of memory evolutive systems. So the collective links idea, the idea of the multiplicity principle that he actually even mentions here. These are things that there is a particular theory we've been using to formulate these things further. But I guess that's more on the mathematics than the conceptual side, right? I also think, I mean, I have the impression that it might also be good to try out working on this in other meetings when we have more people present, so that we can perhaps in a separate occasion start adding questions, right? And kind of spin-off projects that are being developed on top of this. Because, for example, I could see Caron's discussion on Wilfred Sellers and cognitive science and philosophy of language having a lot to do with this issue of what makes a practice a social practice, what makes a practice a normative practice, and something like this. So it kind of could be a spin-off here. There's a lot of technical work going on here, all these things. But I think it's probably too much compared with what's already on paper here, which is quite a lot. We could also start adding, perhaps for a second meeting, the papers where these things are most clearly discussed, because we already have good bibliography on some of these things. And I know it's already getting late and so on, but I wonder, like, just taking the opportunity, is Monica already raised a lot of really interesting issues. I wonder, from these things, if there's any particular one of them, I mean, I think Renzo is leaving now, so probably it's not a good one to ask about this lower one, but if there is a particular thing in this kind of set of ideas that is the most confusing one, that we can take the opportunity to clarify a bit as well, no? I'm gonna add here that we should also describe this at some point.
Wait, I didn't understand, Gabriel.
No, I was just gonna ask if people have questions that, like, in terms of clarification that we could do now. And I just said, like, since you are leaving, you just said that you had to head out. Like, if the questions concern, you know, the discussion on boundary and things, we could approach them later. I don't know.
Yeah, I can take a couple minutes more if.
Oh, I'm sorry. I haven't lowered my hand. Just
No, don't worry. Why don't I know how to?
I don't think I have any questions right now, guys. So
No, it's fine. Just in case anyone has some.
yeah.
Yeah, otherwise we can just work more on this later on and try to perfect it. But I do think it might be useful. Also, if these blue little notes do clarify what these things are, or if questions are open. I think everyone, I can post the link to the Figma file on our group. Also, Monica, I'm not sure if you're interested, but we could add you to our WhatsApp. I don't think you are there, right? If you want, we can. Like, it's a way for you to also, I mean, you don't need to do anything if you don't want to engage. You can just be there. But if you do want kind of engage with other issues, there's a bunch of stuff we do outside of the Monday meeting in terms of projects and conversations. You're very welcome to join.
I think you're muted, Monica.
Okay, all right. Fine or nice. How do I do it?
Just actually, it's actually pretty easy. If you just if you click on this link here, it should invite you to the WhatsApp group.
Oh,
If that's too complicated, you can just send me a message afterwards on this phone number, and I can help you out through the process. It's
okay.
very simple, but just, I mean, if it's easier not to click on something, you can just message me on the cell phone and we can talk.
Okay, I will just add this.
Sure.
Okay, I will manage.
Okay, but I mean, you have my contact, right? I mean, you can just send me a message if you need or anything like that, then I can help you out.
Okay.
Yeah, in any case, I'm gonna add the link to this thing here on our group. So if in between now and a future situation where people are up for continuing mapping this, I mean, I think that, you know, we could start getting arrows from the conjunctural thesis into projects we are involved in more concretely, or, you know, in another did you Germano, of course, just use it here. This link doesn't work for you. Funciona, Germano, esse link aí que eu
I didn't try it yet. I didn't try it yet.
Ah, eu vou te mandar pelo Zap.
Okay.
Mais fácil.
I also now that you said, like, I wonder if I think it's related to the Victor's interest on like, because I was thinking about how like the boundary stuff relates to the conjuncture and to the align misalign, but maybe there's also the question of how the misalign align relates to the political social, right? So how there's a sort of like, because we're saying that it's kind of like orthogonal things, right? The political saturation is something along the lines that there we have to first be able to see this distinction between aligned and non-aligned to then ask what is political and social, because otherwise we confound those things. Also, like understanding how aligned and misaligned atoms interact and get politicized is also, I think, the way to, I think maybe there are like further political consequences there to be.
Yeah, I agree, especially because this might clarify something as well, because there is a consequence for this graph here, right? If the world is aligned or misaligned, because if it is aligned, you could say that the picture of for example, the picture of family conflicts from the standpoint of work and the picture of state conflicts from the standpoint of work, the picture of work relations from the standpoint of segregatory struggles or anti-racist struggles, and the picture of property relations from that point of view, and so on and so forth, that these things would converge, right? In a vulgarized space, you could assume that they won't, right? So there is a connection also back, as you said, from aligned and misaligned back to this diagram. But for example, it follows from the aligned and misaligned thing that peripherized politics doesn't necessarily like you get non-convergent mediation. So how you organize at the level of affinity doesn't necessarily track with how you organize at the level of the state and how you organize at the economic level, right?
Right. I think this also relates to the militant, the kinds of militant work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, guys, we pretty much practiced the meme of the guy with the red arrows in the board. Like we literally did that meme today. So yeah. Yeah, I do think it's useful. I think that we can, I can see with us continuing develop this further.
I was doing that right now, yeah.
This is how we look for regular people right now. Clearly this needs to come here, right? Yeah, and I think it leaves us with a nice challenge for next time, which is if we do want to expand this, okay, probably like it would be worth making it a bit neater so it's easier to add other things, but there might be an issue of layers, like, you know, probably if we, rather than use this Figma file, we open like a Figma page where you can actually add layers of information, right? And then kind of silence them or make them invisible to just go back to basics. It might be easier to add like things on top of things in that sense, right? For example, I don't think we should directly add a project here. We're writing a text, we're doing a book project, but it's, you know, like being able to say something like, there is a project that does this, you know, that we're working on, like focusing on this part of it, or there is a project that focused on this part here. If we could add it as a separate layer, it might be good. yeah, guys, I think that's it. I'm not sure if anyone has. I know Renzo needs to go, and Fatima is like in her usual 2 a.m. Okay, so I guess sleep well. See you all later. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we can
Okay,
go.
goodbye.
I think everyone has like a melted brain syndrome right now.
I do.
Beijão. Yeah, me too.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Beijão, gente.
Bye. Ciao, ciao.